Verse 14. That which is acted upon by transformations, either past, present, or yet to be manifested, is the qualified. That is to say, the qualified is the substance which is being acted upon by time and by the samskaras, and getting changed and being manifested always. Verse 15. The succession of changes is the cause of manifold evolution. Verse 16. By making samyama on the three sorts of changes comes the knowledge of past and future. We must not lose sight of the first definition of samyama. When the mind has attained to that state when it identifies itself with the internal impression of the object, leaving the external, and when, by long practice, that is retained by the mind, and the mind can get into that state in a moment, that is samyama. If a man in that state wants to know the past and future, he has to make a samyama on the changes in the samskaras. Chapter 3, verse 13. Some are working now at present, some have worked out, and some are waiting to work. So, by making a samyama on these, he knows the past and future. Verse 17. By making samyama on word, meaning, and knowledge, which are ordinarily confused, comes the knowledge of all animal sounds. The word represents the external cause, the meaning represents the internal vibration that travels to the brain through the channels of the indriyas or senses, conveying the external impression to the mind, and knowledge represents the reaction of the mind, with which comes perception. These three, confused, make our sense objects. Suppose I hear a word. There is first the external vibration, next the internal sensation carried to the mind by the organ of hearing. Then the mind reacts, and I know the word. The word I know is a mixture of the three: vibration, sensation, and reaction. Ordinarily, these three are inseparable, but by practice, the yogi can separate them. When a man has attained to this, if he makes a samyama on any sound, he understands the meaning which that sound was intended to express, whether it was made by man or by any other animal. Verse 18. By perceiving the impressions comes the knowledge of past life. Each experience that we have comes in the form of a wave in the citta, and this subsides and becomes finer and finer, but is never lost. It remains there in minute form, and if we can bring this wave up again, it becomes memory. So, if the yogi can make a samyama on these past impressions in the mind, he will begin to remember all his past lives. Verse 19. By making samyama on the signs in another's body, knowledge of his mind comes. Each man has particular signs on his body, which differentiate him from others. When the yogi makes a samyama on these signs, he knows the nature of the mind of that person. Verse 20. But not its contents, that not being the object of the samyama. He would not know the contents of the mind by making a samyama on the body. There would be required a twofold samyama, first on the signs in the body, and then on the mind itself. The yogi would then know everything that is in that mind. Verse 21. By making samyama on the form of the body, the perceptibility of the form being obstructed and the power of manifestation in the eye being separated, the yogi's body becomes unseen. A yogi standing in the midst of this room can apparently vanish. He does not really vanish, but he will not be seen by anyone. The form and the body are, as it were, separated. You must remember that this can only be done when the yogi has attained to that power of concentration, when form and the thing formed have been separated. Then he makes a samyama on that, and the power to perceive forms is obstructed, because the power of perceiving forms comes from the junction of form and the thing formed. Verse 22. By this, the disappearance or concealment of words which are being spoken and such other things are also explained. Verse 23. Karma is of two kinds, soon to be fructified and late to be fructified. By making samyama on these, or by the signs called arishta, portents, the yogis know the exact time of separation from their bodies. When a yogi makes a samyama on his own karma, upon those impressions in his mind which are now working and those which are just waiting to work, he knows exactly by those that are waiting when his body will fall. He knows when he will die, at what hour, even at what minute. The Hindus think very much of that knowledge or consciousness of the nearness of death, because it is taught in the Gita that the thoughts at the moment of departure are great powers in determining the next life. Verse 24. By making samyama on friendship, mercy, etc., chapter 1, verse 33, yogi excels in the respective qualities. Verse 25. By making samyama on the strength of the elephant and others, their respective strength comes to the yogi. When a yogi has attained to this samyama and wants strength, he makes a samyama on the strength of the elephant and gets it. Infinite energy is at the disposal of everyone if he only knows how to get it. The yogi has discovered the science of getting it. Verse 26. By making samyama on the effulgent light, chapter 1, verse 36, comes the knowledge of the fine, the obstructed, and the remote. When the yogi makes samyama on that effulgent light in the heart, he sees things which are very remote, things, for instance, that are happening in a distant place and which are obstructed by mountain barriers, and also things which are very fine. Verse 27. By making samyama on the sun comes the knowledge of the world. Verse 28. On the moon comes the knowledge of the cluster of stars. Verse 29. On the pole star comes the knowledge of the motions of the stars. Verse 30. On the navel circle comes the knowledge of the constitution of the body. Verse 31. On the hollow of the throat comes cessation of hunger. When a man is very hungry, if he can make samyama on the hollow of the throat, hunger ceases. Verse 32. On the nerve called kurma comes fixity of the body. When he is practicing, the body is not disturbed. Verse 33. On the light emanating from the top of the head, sight of the siddhas. The siddhas are beings who are a little above ghosts. When the yogi concentrates his mind on the top of his head, he will see these siddhas. The word siddha does not refer to those men who have become free, a sense in which it is often used. Verse 34. Or by the power of pratibha, all knowledge. All these can come without any samyama to the man who has the power of pratibha, spontaneous enlightenment from purity. When a man has risen to a high state of pratibha, he has that great light. All things are apparent to him. Everything comes to him naturally without making samyama. Verse 35. In the heart, knowledge of minds. Verse 36. Enjoyment comes from the non-discrimination of the soul and sattva, which are totally different because the latter's actions are for another. Samyama on the self-centered one gives knowledge of the Purusha. All action of sattva, a modification of prakriti characterized by light and happiness, is for the soul. When sattva is free from egoism and illuminated with the pure intelligence of Purusha, it is called the self-centered one, because in that state it becomes independent of all relations. Verse 37. From that arises the knowledge belonging to pratibha and supernatural hearing, touching, seeing, tasting, and smelling. Verse 38. These are obstacles to samadhi, but they are powers in the worldly state. To the yogi, knowledge of the enjoyments of the world comes by the junction of the Purusha and the mind. If he wants to make samyama on the knowledge that they are two different things, nature and soul, he gets knowledge of the Purusha. From that arises discrimination. When he has got that discrimination, he gets the pratibha, the light of supreme genius. These powers, however, are obstructions to the attainment of the highest goal, the knowledge of the pure self and freedom. These are, as it were, to be met in the way, and if the yogi rejects them, he attains the highest. If he is tempted to acquire these, his further progress is barred. Verse 39. When the cause of bondage of the citta has become loosened, the yogi, by his knowledge of its channels of activity, the nerves, enters another's body. The yogi can enter a dead body and make it get up and move, even while he himself is working in another body. Or he can enter a living body and hold that man's mind and organs in check, and for the time being act through the body of that man. That is done by the yogi coming to this discrimination of Purusha and nature. If he wants to enter another's body, he makes a samyama on that body and enters it, because not only is his soul omnipresent, but his mind also, as the yogi teaches. It is one bit of the universal mind. Now, however, it can only work through the nerve currents in this body. But when the yogi has loosened himself from these nerve currents, he can work through other things. Verse 40. By conquering the current called udana, the yogi does not sink in water or in swamps. He can walk on thorns, etc., and can die at will. Udana is the name of the nerve current that governs the lungs and all the upper parts of the body, and when he is master of it, he becomes light in weight. He does not sink in water. He can walk on thorns and sword blades and stand in fire, and can depart this life whenever he likes. Verse 41. By the conquest of the current samana, he is surrounded by a blaze of light. Whenever he likes, light flashes from his body. Verse 42. By making samyama on the relation between the ear and the akasha comes divine hearing. There is the akasha, the ether, and the instrument, the ear. By making samyama on them, the yogi gets supernormal hearing. He hears everything. Anything spoken or sounded miles away, he can hear. Verse 43. By making samyama on the relation between the akasha and the body, and becoming light as cotton wool, etc., through meditation on them, the yogi goes through the skies. This akasha is the material of this body. It is only akasha in a certain form that has become the body. If the yogi makes a samyama on this akasha material of his body, it acquires the lightness of akasha, and he can go anywhere through the air. So in the other case also. Verse 44. By making samyama on the real modifications of the mind, outside of the body, called great disembodiedness, comes disappearance of the covering to light. The mind, in its foolishness, thinks that it is working in this body. Why should I be bound by one system of nerves and put the ego only in the body if the mind is omnipresent? There is no reason why I should. The yogi wants to feel the ego wherever he likes. The mental waves which arise in the absence of egoism in the body are called real modifications, or great disembodiedness. When he has succeeded in making samyama on these modifications, all covering to light goes away, and all darkness and ignorance vanish. Everything appears to him to be full of knowledge. Verse 45. By making samyama on the gross and fine forms of the elements, their essential traits, the inherence of the gunas in them, and on their contributing to the experience of the soul, comes mastery of the elements. The yogi makes samyama on the elements, first on the gross, and then on the finer states. This samyama is taken up more by a sect of the Buddhists. They take a lump of clay and make samyama on that, and gradually they begin to see the fine materials of which it is composed, and when they have known all the fine materials in it, they get power over that element. So with all the elements, the yogi can conquer them all. Verse 46. From that comes minuteness and the rest of the powers, glorification of the body, and indestructibleness of the bodily qualities. This means that the yogi has attained the 8 powers. He can make himself as minute as a particle, or as huge as a mountain, as heavy as the earth, or as light as the air. He can reach anything he likes He can rule everything he wants, he can conquer everything he wants, and so on. A lion will sit at his feet like a lamb, and all his desires will be fulfilled at will. Verse 47. The glorification of the body is beauty, complexion, strength, adamantine hardness. The body becomes indestructible. Nothing can injure it. Nothing can destroy it until the yogi wishes. Breaking the rod of time, he lives in this universe with his body. In the Vedas, it is written that for that man there is no more disease, death, or pain. Verse 48. By making samyama on the objectivity and power of illumination of the organs, on egoism, the inherence of the gunas in them, and on their contributing to the experience of the soul, comes the conquest of the organs. In the perception of external objects, the organs leave their place in the mind and go towards the object. This is followed by knowledge. Egoism also is present in the act. When the yogi makes samyama on these and the other two by gradation, he conquers the organs. Take up anything that you see or feel, a book for instance. First, concentrate the mind on it, then on the knowledge that it is in the form of a book, and then on the ego that sees the book, and so on. By that practice, all the organs will be conquered. Verse 49. From that comes to the body the power of rapid movement like the mind, power of the organs independently of the body, and conquest of nature. Just as by the conquest of the elements come glorified body, so from the conquest of the organs will come the above-mentioned powers. Verse 50. By making samyama on the discrimination between the sattva and the purusha come omnipotence and omniscience. When nature has been conquered and the difference between the purusha and nature realized, that the purusha is indestructible, pure and perfect, then come omnipotence and omniscience. Verse 51. By giving up even these powers comes the destruction of the very seed of evil, which leads to kaivalya. He attains aloneness, independence, and becomes free. When one gives up even the ideas of omnipotence and omniscience, there comes entire rejection of enjoyment, of the temptations from celestial beings. When the yogi has seen all these wonderful powers and rejected them, he reaches the goal. What are all these powers? Simply manifestations. They are no better than dreams. Even omnipotence is a dream. It depends on the mind. So long as there is a mind, it can be understood. But the goal is beyond even the mind. Verse 52. The yogi should not feel allured or flattered by the overtures of celestial beings for fear of evil again. There are other dangers too. Gods and other beings come to tempt the yogi. They do not want anyone to be perfectly free. They are jealous, just as we are, and worse than us sometimes. They are very much afraid of losing their places. Those yogis who do not reach perfection die and become gods. Leaving the direct road, they go into one of the side streets and get these powers. Then, again, they have to be born. But he who is strong enough to withstand these temptations and goes straight to the goal becomes free. Verse 53. By making samyama on a particle of time and its precession and succession comes discrimination. How are we to avoid all these things, these devas and heavens and powers? By discrimination, by knowing good from evil. Therefore, a samyama is given by which the power of discrimination can be strengthened. This is by making a samyama on a particle of time, and the time preceding and following it. Verse 54. Those things which cannot be differentiated by species, signs, and place, even they will be discriminated by the above samyama. The misery that we suffer comes from ignorance, from non-discrimination between the real and the unreal. We all take the bad for the good, the dream for the reality. Soul is the only reality, and we have forgotten it. Body is an unreal dream, and we think we are all bodies. This non-discrimination is the cause of misery. It is caused by ignorance. When discrimination comes, it brings strength, and then alone can we avoid all these various ideas of body, heavens, and gods. This ignorance arises through differentiating by species, sign, and place. For instance, take a cow. The cow is differentiated from the dog by species. Even with the cows alone, how do we make the distinction between one cow and another? By signs. If two objects are exactly similar, they can be distinguished if they are in different places. When objects are so mixed up that even these differentiae will not help us, the power of discrimination acquired by the above-mentioned practice will give us the ability to distinguish them. The highest philosophy of the yogi is based upon this fact, that the Purusha is pure and perfect, and is the only simple that exists in this universe. The body and mind are compounds, and yet we are ever identifying ourselves with them. This is the great mistake, that the distinction has been lost. When this power of discrimination has been attained, man sees that everything in this world, mental and physical, is a compound, and as such cannot be the Purusha. Verse 55. The saving knowledge is that knowledge of discrimination which simultaneously covers all objects in all their variations. Saving, because the knowledge takes the yogi across the ocean of birth and death. The whole of Prakriti, in all its states, subtle and gross, is within the grasp of this knowledge. There is no succession in perception by this knowledge. It takes in all things simultaneously, at a glance. Verse 56. By the similarity of purity between the sattva and the Purusha comes kaivalya. When the soul realizes that it depends on nothing in the universe, from gods to the lowest atom, that is called kaivalya, or isolation, or perfection. It is attained when this mixture of purity and impurity, called sattva, or intellect, has been made as pure as the Purusha itself. Then the sattva reflects only the unqualified essence of purity, which is the Purusha. Chapter 4. Independence. Verse 1. The siddhis, or powers, are attained by birth, chemical means, power of words, mortification, or concentration. Sometimes a man is born with the siddhis, powers, of course, those he had earned in his previous incarnation. This time he is born, as it were, to enjoy the fruits of them. It is said of Kapila, the great father of the Samkhya philosophy, that he was a born siddha, which means literally a man who has attained to success. The yogis claim that these powers can be gained by chemical means. All of you know that chemistry originally began as alchemy. Men went in search of the philosopher's stone and elixirs of life and so forth. In India, there was a sect called the Rasayanas. Their idea was that ideality, knowledge, spirituality, and religion were all very right, but that the body was the only instrument by which to attain to all these. If the body came to an end every now and again, it would take so much more time to attain to the goal. For instance, a man wants to practice yoga or wants to become spiritual. Before he has advanced very far, he dies. Then he takes another body and begins again, then dies, and so on. In this way, much time will be lost in dying and being born again. If the body could be made strong and perfect, so that it would get rid of birth and death, we should have so much more time to become spiritual. So these Rasayanas say, first make the body very strong. They claim that this body can be made immortal. Their idea is that if the mind manufactures the body, and if it be true that each mind is only one outlet to the infinite energy, there should be no limit to each outlet getting any amount of power from outside. Why is it impossible to keep our bodies all the time? We have to manufacture all the bodies that we ever have. As soon as this body dies, we shall have to manufacture another. If we can do that, why cannot we do it just here and now, without getting out of the present body? The theory is perfectly correct. If it is possible that we live after death and make other bodies, why is it impossible that we should have the power of making bodies here, without entirely dissolving this body, simply changing it continually? They also thought that in mercury and in sulfur was hidden the most wonderful power, and that by certain preparations of these, a man could keep the body as long as he liked. Others believed that certain drugs could bring powers, such as flying through the air. Many of the most wonderful medicines of the present day we owe to the Rasayanas, notably the use of metals in medicine. Certain sects of yogis claim that many of their principal teachers are still living in their old bodies. Patanjali, the great authority on yoga, does not deny this.